How you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Happy to see you.
Oh, I forgot to turn on my camera, my video. Okay. Right, okay, okay, my camera's on. Hey, Minna. Gosh, we've been having technical problems. We've been having technical problems.
No worries, no worries.
Okay, sorry, I'm having trouble with my laptop. Okay, right, so um, everybody, let's welcome Miss Mirna Fernandez. She's come all the way from Bolivia. And a surprise for everybody, actually, I haven't told anyone other than staff, of course, that Mirna here is an alumni of UMT.
Yeah,
Yeah, Mirna is a UMT alumni. She graduated with a master's degree from UMT. And so she's your senior, everyone. And she's joined us tonight, all the way from, well, tonight, for us it's tonight. For Mirna, it's 8:30 in the morning. Today, Saturday, no,
yeah.
today's Sunday. Sunday. I always feel like I'm in a time tunnel every time I'm talking to you, Mirna. So it's Sunday morning where you are now, right?
Yes, Sunday morning.
Yeah. Gosh, isn't that funny? Okay, so our talk tonight, actually, I just gave the title, but I don't know if that's what you want to talk about. So I'll just introduce everybody, tell everybody a little bit about you, Mirna.
Sure.
Mirna graduated with a master's degree from here, UMT, which is a Tropimundo program, which means that you had a lot of universities on your transcript, right? Not just UMT.
Yes,
You had the university, the Free University of Brussels.
yes,
Where was it? You did it here, Malaysia, in Brussels. Where
yes.
else did you go?
And Italy, uh, the
Italy.
University of Firenze in Italy.
Oh yeah, wow, that's so great. And you're also a girl guide.
Yes, I am also a girl guide. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's
And I met the
amazing.
girl guides in Malaysia. They are amazing.
Yeah, so Myrna's had a lot of experience working with communities and working with a lot of different bodies, right, Myrna? Um,
True.
yeah, so that's so cool. So tonight, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, so that they,
Sure,
because yeah, they don't know.
sure. My name is Mirna Fernandez. I am from Bolivia. I am an environmental engineer by training, and my master's, as Mrs. Chaisani said, is on tropical biodiversity and ecosystems, which is the Tropimundo program. I did one semester in UMT, and that is why I am also an alumni. And well, I am an activist and a girl guide for a long time. I am an environmental activist. I work on environmental issues for a very long time, especially on climate change and biodiversity. So I joined local groups. I am a co-founder of a group that is called Reacción Climática. In Bolivia, is the first youth organization that works on climate change issues. Also, the Save Madidi campaign, that it's a campaign focused on the most biodiverse protected area in my country. And I follow for more than 12 years already. Oh my God, I'm getting so old. I follow UN negotiation processes on environmental issues, especially on biodiversity and climate change. But I got more active on biodiversity because that's my major, and I joined a youth group that is the official youth participation mechanism at the CPT. And that is what I'm going to talk to you a little bit more today.
Oh, so I'll just give, well, technic metaphorically hand the mic over to you.
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
I have a small presentation. I will see if I can download it or share it. I think I can share. Second. Okay, can you see my full screen now?
Yes,
Okay,
yes. Lovely.
great, great. Okay, then I'm going to explain you a little bit about my work and what do we do in GYBN. The GYBN is the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. Here I serve as a policy co-coordinator. So our main work is, we are two policy coordinators, me and a colleague from the Philippines. Um, and I'm going to explain you what we do, that is policy and advocacy at the CBD level. First, I would like to know how much time I have so I don't go over the time, so I can adjust a little bit my speed.
We're aiming for about an hour.
Okay,
Yeah, so then
okay.
you'll have your maybe that'll be including the question and answer session.
Yes, yes. No, don't worry, I won't take 1 hour, so I hope to take like half an hour and leave the rest for questions and answers. Okay.
Okay.
So, well, first I'm going to explain you what is given. The Global Youth Biodiversity Network is a global coalition of young people from all over the world, not only young people, but also youth organizations. And we have joined forces to halt and reverse biodiversity loss and lead a society towards a life in harmony with nature, which is the goal of the Convention of Biological Diversity. The CBD, we are here, the official platform for youth participation, which means that if you want to attend a CBD meeting, you have to be part of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, or you have to reach us to have accreditation. The CBD is one of 3 sister conventions in the United Nations that are related to the environment. The CBD, the Climate Change Convention, that is the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework to Combat Climate Change, and the UNCCD, that is the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. These 3 conventions are called sister conventions because the 3 of them were born in 1992 in the Earth Summit. That was a very famous UN summit, the most important one for the environment, they say. Besides being the platform for youth participation, we are a global community of young people that is interested in biodiversity issues. And when I mean global, it's for real. we have a very wide network. The parts in colors are the parts when we have national chapters. So we do have a lot of national chapters. Actually, we're missing Malaysia. I was commenting, Mrs. Chaitani, that it would be interesting to have already given Malaysia, and we might have soon. Um, Besides the more than 50 national chapters and 3 regional chapters, as given Europe, given LAC, and given Africa, we have members in 172 countries from more than 600 youth organizations. And in social media, we're reaching more than 12.8 million people following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Plus 3 million views on videos on YouTube. So we really have a vibrant youth community working on biodiversity issues. We work on youth-led action. Our main areas of action are empowerment and capacity building. We do a lot of workshops all over the world with young people. We train them on biodiversity issues, on how they can engage in the CBD, how they can act on biodiversity together with their governments, because the CBD in the end is a government-led process. So the governments have to implement the decisions that are made in the CBD, and we help you to understand how they can help their governments to implement these decisions. We do advocacy, which is a little bit of my job, and campaigning, because we also try to do a lot of campaigns around our youth priorities, and we do a lot of mobilization and actions. That is the most fun part, and we do a lot of global mobilization, marches, campaigns, and things like this. Our main focus of work the last 4 years have been on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And this was very important because this was a 10 years framework that is going to lead the global action on biodiversity and all the national policies on biodiversity for the next decades. And it's going to have an impact even further because it has a vision for 2050. So it was going to impact the next 3 decades on biodiversity. So this was very important. And that is why we focused a lot of our attention here. And this was all defined in the CBD COP15 that happened very recently in Montreal, Canada, from the 7th to the 19th of December. And I'm just coming back from there, so I can tell you it was very cold, but the negotiations were very interesting. It was a very long road to reach to this conference because we started the negotiations for this framework in 2018 in Sharm el-Sheikh, that happened in Egypt. As you will see, we travel a lot because the CBD, I don't know, I heard a joke that is like a circus. You have the same people, but in different places going all over the world. But we're discussing about the same things. So we started discussing in Sharm el-Sheikh in 2018 how this global framework was gonna look like, and then we had national and regional consultations in different countries to find out what the countries wanted this framework to look like. And then we had open-ended working groups that were specific meetings to design the content and the targets that were gonna be in this framework. And after the open-ended working group 2 that happened in Rome, we had COVID. And that was the most complicated thing because the name of this framework is post-2020 because it was supposed to be adopted in 2020. But then COVID happened and everything got delayed. And that is why the post-2020 framework has been adopted in 2022 because we had to have a lot of virtual meetings, a lot of extended meetings, a lot of meetings were suspended, and then we had to take it afterwards. And that is why we have virtual meetings of SABSTA, SBI, as you can see, and the third open-ended working group also happened virtually. And then we went back to physical meetings in Geneva this year. And also we had additional meetings because we were supposed to have only 3 meetings of the open-ended working group, and we ended up having 5 because the governments didn't agree. They were very complicated. They all wanted different things and couldn't arrive on the precise text of each target. And that is why we had to have 2 additional meetings, which meant that we had a delegation of young people additionally traveling to Nairobi and then to Canada before the COP. So what happens is that we have different drafts. The drafts are the documents trying to see how it's going to look like in the end. So we had many versions of this draft of the post-2020. We have potential elements, then a 0 draft, and an updated 0 draft that was called 1.5 draft. Then we had the first draft that was called the 2.0 draft. So this was crazy. We came after each negotiation with a very different document with a very different version of the targets. But in the end, the final draft that was adopted looks a little bit like this. It's very complicated still, but we have a 2050 vision that is living in harmony with nature, a 2030 vision that is more long and it talks about halting and reversing biodiversity loss for the benefit of all people and planets by 2030. We have 4 goals that are conservation, sustainable use, fair and equitable benefit sharing of biodiversity, and means of implementation for this whole framework. And then we have a group of 22 targets. Actually, now they are 23. I need to update that slide. We have 23 targets that are grouped in 3 different categories. Targets that are related to reducing threats of biodiversity. We have targets regarding protected areas, species protection, restoring ecosystems, biodiversity planning. So all these areas are here. In the second group of targets, we have targets related to meeting people's needs. Here we have targets about sustainable use, targets about climate change, about decreasing perverse subsidies that affect biodiversity, and other types of targets like this that are related to people. And the last group of targets are tools and solutions to implement this framework and to mainstream biodiversity in different sectors. So here we have a bunch of targets that are related to finance, science and technology, human rights, gender equality, transparency. So these are all means of implementation for the governments to achieve the targets that we have. On top of that, we have another sections that are related to enabling conditions, transparency, implementation, communication. It's very complicated, the document. And just to give you an idea, the targets for negotiation look at like this. I'm not going to read all of this. It's just for you to understand how complicated were these negotiations. So for each target, we have a text like that, and we needed to end up with a 3 lines targets. And all the countries were proposing new text and new text. So when you have a new text proposed by a country, let's say Malaysia wants to propose, for example, something about indigenous territories, they will add indigenous and traditional territories, the part in green, and it would come in brackets because it has not been agreed yet. So all the proposals that came from different countries came in brackets, and this is how the targets looked like before the negotiations in Canada. It was very complicated, and our job was to try to ensure that the youth priorities were there, and what we call is babysit the text. It means that when we have a text that is very important for us, we have to babysit it, to look after it and make sure that it's still there. And if somebody wants to take it out, fight and talk with the countries and say, please, please, this is very important for the young people, so don't delete it. It has to remain. So very complicated, but still very interesting. So for example, one of the texts in Target 3 that was very important for us was a free, prior, and informed consent. That is at the last part in pink. So that means that when you go and implement a protected area or whichever project, you have to inform the communities of the potential impacts that this intervention is going to have. And if they agree, only if they agree, you go ahead. If they don't agree, after they are being informed, you cannot do this. It's a very important principle in international law, and we wanted to have it there because many times governments just go and say, okay, this is a protected area, and it's a strict protection protected area, so everybody who lives here, please move. You go and put your house somewhere else. And that is terrible because it has a lot of impacts on the lives of the people. We wanted to go. Well, I explained then a little bit how the text looked like. Now I'm going to explain a little how the negotiations work. Very complicated. UN negotiations, they all work the same way. They work by consensus, which means that you have 195 countries sitting in the same room, and they are all having to take one decision. And to take a decision by consensus, you have to have everybody agreeing. It's not by majority, it's not votation. If somebody disagrees, then the part of the text that a country doesn't like goes out. And that is why it's so complicated, because they take a lot of time to agree on the specific text that they want. And of course, they are complicated because afterwards they will have to implement this decision in the countries. They will have to make a national law with the Ministry of Environment, and then they will have to implement it in the countries. And that is why they don't want to put anything that is too difficult to implement. So we have different working documents. Here we have examples. For these negotiations in Canada, we have the outcome of the open-ended working group 4 that happened in Nairobi, this meeting. And we also had a report of an informal group that was a small group of countries that decided to do extra work to propose a new set of targets. Based on these documents, we have discussions in plenary. As I told you, you have a picture there. This is how a negotiations room look like. You have a lot of tables, and in each table you have two representatives from one country with one microphone, and they can speak whenever they want to advance the discussions. What we have as youth, we have one table with two seats as well, as if we were a country, and we can say whatever we want. We can say our interventions, but there is a difference between countries and us as young people. We are part of the stakeholders. So we have 9 stakeholder groups. We are youth, but also we have women, indigenous peoples and local communities, industry, local governments, academia, etc., which are groups from civil society. These groups have a voice in the negotiations, but they don't have a vote. And this is very important because we can say whatever we want, but it doesn't mean it's going to translate into the text. If we want our text to be in the text, reflected in brackets, as I showed you before, we need at least one country to support what we say. So after we make an intervention, we read whatever we say. The president of the negotiation or the chair is going to ask, is there a country that supports what the youth just said? And if we have one country supporting, then it makes sense. If no country raises their hands, then all our work is in vain because it's not going to make it into the text. That is why it's so complicated. We shouldn't have right to vote, but the UN doesn't work like that. So we have these negotiations in plenary when we have all the countries sitting in these big, big rooms. But when the countries don't arrive to a decision, they gather the countries that have a conflict in something that is called contact groups. So these are smaller room discussions when they decide on something that is very complicated to decide. So the countries that have a specific interest on this item, they go and discuss there many times until 2, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., just until they find a consensus. And they go back to plenary and say, okay, we found consensus, and we continue with the negotiations. So this is more or less a diagram on how the negotiations work. In plenary, when we don't have a final agreement, we create a contact group. In the contact group, they have discussions based on the most recent version of the text. In this case was the JPF text. Then they have the negotiation and they resolve the text with different views. We can also participate in the contact groups as youths, but again, we need one country to support whatever we say. And then we see the review and the approvals of the reports of the contact groups. And these are based, and after we approve, we have the report outcomes of the meeting. And what do we do there as youth? As you can see in the picture, we have one table with 2 chairs that say youth. And if we have like 100 young people, in Canada, we had 200, almost 300 young people, which was a very crazy. So we have the people sitting and a bunch of young people behind the people sitting, just cheering whoever is going to intervene on our behalf, like that. And what we do is first we have national and regional consultations, because as you saw on the map, we're a very big network. We are in many different countries. So we want to represent all the voices from all the youth from these different countries. So between 2017 and 2022, we consulted thousands of youth in more than 110 countries. So not only our chapters, but in universities, in different events, and we also had funding to go to some countries and do some consultations. We had these national consultations, which were workshops, as you can see in the pictures, where young people would put their priorities in different discussions using post-its, dynamics, discussions, dialogues, debates, and everything. And then each of these consultations had a consultation report. And then this consultation report is sent to us, the policy team, and our work is to get all of these reports from all these national consultations and try to summarize them into global youth priorities, which is a hell of a job.
Miss Fana, you muted. We cannot hear you. You're muted.
I just realized that I got muted
Yeah.
by someone.
Sorry
I
about
don't
that.
know how much you didn't hear, so I
Yeah,
repeat.
I can hear you now, Mina.
I don't know until which moment did you hear me?
Just I think only about 10 to 15 seconds ago.
Okay,
Just a little bit, yeah.
okay. So I was talking about these national and regional consultations. So I was saying in the last years, since 2017, we had consultations in more than 110 countries when we hear what the young people want for the future with biodiversity. So they tell us, well, each country organizes it a different way. Most of them do a lot of dynamics with post-it notes and dialogues and debates and however they want to do. In the end, they send us a report of the consultation. Many of these consultations happened in universities or were organized by youth hubs or youth activist groups that decided to do a consultation, and they send us a report. My work with the policy team is to get all of these consultation reports and summarize them into global youth priorities, which is a hell of a job because it's a lot of information and it's very complicated to also get all of these priorities and make sure that you're not forgetting anything and you're getting the main idea of what you'd want. But it's very important because when we hold the microphone in the United Nations, we know that we are not speaking from ourselves, but we are speaking from a global community in more than 110 countries with millions of young people behind, which means a lot. I don't know. Suddenly I cannot pass the slide.
Are you stuck, Mirna?
Yes, somehow now I cannot pass to the next slide. Give me a second. Give me a second. I will stop the sharing and
Yeah, stop and try again.
Okay.
I have to mute myself as well because it's raining. I don't want you to hear the rain.
Oh, it's fine. I think you can see now. Yeah. You can see and hear me now still, right?
Yes. Youth priorities.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so the main result of all this work of summarizing the youth priorities ended up in these 3 priorities, which are the main priorities that we're repeating in every single consultation, and somehow are an umbrella of more priorities that young people have. The first one is intergenerational equity and full and effective participation of young people. This is probably the most important priority because it means that all the young people should be sitting in the decision-making tables when they talk about biodiversity. So it shouldn't be only the governments, but the government should always invite young people when they design their national biodiversity plans. An intergenerational equity means a fairness between generations. It means that when we take actions in these present generations, we make sure that they don't have long-term impacts for the future generations. So they will enjoy the same right to a clean, healthy, a sustainable environment that is a human right. That is the first priority. The second priority is transformative education, because surprisingly, in all the youth consultations, they always mention education. Well, it's not that surprisingly because education is very important for us. It shapes our lives, our careers. You're all here because you're students of UMT, and education is really going to change the way you see the world. So if we want to take care of biodiversity, we need an education system that reconnects us with nature. We don't need only to have biology classes, but we should have an education that allows us to go out and see how to grow our own vegetables, how to identify the sounds of the birds, to predict some weather changes, things like that, that were very normal for our ancestors, and now we lost this connection, and that's why we don't care for biodiversity as other cultures. It is because we have that disconnection with nature, and we need to reconnect it through education. And the third priority are rights-based approaches for people and nature. We are here talking about human rights, but also rights of nature. They are interconnected and interdependent, which means that one cannot be achieved without achieving the other. And that is why we want to put both of them in the same level. Based on these youth priorities, we developed all our policy interventions, and we tried to make them text proposals to make it into the JBF. We translated this into a booklet that it's called Youth Recommendations for the Post-2020 that can be downloaded in that link. If you're interested, I can send by message. But it's a booklet with all the youth priorities and the recommendations for the text of the JBF. This is something that we share with the negotiators of this country before the meetings, so they know what we are going to propose. So when we get a microphone and we propose something, we have a lot of countries raising their hands to support us because they knew in advance when we were going to propose, and this makes a lot of difference in the negotiations. Here are some examples. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's very complicated, but for example, for targets 2, for target 21, that was about human rights. We had very specific proposals. The text that we wanted to babysit, it's in yellow. So we wanted to see here the participation in decision-making, access to justice and information there, and the rights of indigenous peoples over their lands, territories, and resources protected. We wanted to add children and youth because it was only said youth, and we think children also have these rights. And very important, it was to add environmental right, human rights defenders, because we didn't have any mention to environmental defenders in the whole JBF. And this is people that many times are under threat, even their lives are under threat for defending the environment. So they should be specifically taken care of in a global framework for biodiversity. And for different sections, we had also different proposals. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it can be a bit boring if you didn't follow the negotiations, but still, things that are very important for us. Education was a whole section that we were proposing. So this was not there, and now we have a whole section in transformative education, thanks to years and years of youth asking for a specific section on education. We had a proposal for the mission. The mission doesn't look exactly like our proposal, but some things are there. Target 3, that is about protected areas. We also had a lot of proposals because we think that they have to be effectively managed, equitably government that respect the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. So we had some proposals there. And so on for all the targets. If you're interested into text proposals, you can download it, but it's just for you to have an idea of more or less how we presented this to the negotiators so they could know in advance and support our proposals. What do we do there as young people besides posing for cute pictures? It's really trying to do as much work as we can in policy advocacy. We also had an actions team, and we also had a team that was more focused on communications, but my team was policy, so that's what I can explain you. The process of policy advocacy more or less looks like this. We have the consultative process that, as you saw, we have national consultations in different countries, and we gather their priorities. Based on the priorities that you saw, we do our position building. Our final position is this text that I showed you, this booklet with our text proposals. Based on these text proposals, we draft interventions. So we write like 3-minute discourses. We're allowed only to talk for 3 minutes. So a youth representative takes the microphone and speaks for 3 minutes about whatever we want to see in the text. That is a whole another part of my job. When we finish drafting the intervention, we decide who is going to speak. We try to have regional balance and gender balance. So if we have too many youth guys speaking, now we want to see a girl face. So we try to find a girl that first deserves it, that has been active in the policy team, so deserves to have the opportunity to speak in the UN because it's a big thing, it's important, and they always love the opportunity. And then I have to do a lot of coaching on the person, no? Like training, like, okay, you read, these are the important things that you have to highlight. You have to put a special emphasis on your voice here. Here you have to sound like very sad. Here you have to sound like very demanding. Yeah, here you have to sound angry, you know. And it's very interesting. But in the end, we make very dramatic interventions, but it is important because we need the parties to wake up and listen to us and then be ready to support. After this, we do tracking. Tracking is another important part of our job because we take notes of how the negotiations are going and which each country is saying. And we do lobbying, that is meeting the countries and convincing them. I'm going to explain these points one by one. And after all, we get community feedback. We have working groups in the policy team that were focused on post-2020, that is this group of targets that were discussed. SABSTA is the subsidiary body of scientific, technical, and technological advice. This is where we have all the group of nerds that like very technical issues, like invasive alien species or climate change or agroecology or I don't know, specific protected areas measures and things like that. All of this is discussed at SABSTA. And we also have the group on subsidiary body of implementation. Here we have the other type of nerds that are more focused on economic issues or law, implementation issues, transparency, and all of these things. Oh, but also communication, outreach, and education are discussed in this SBI group. When I talked about tracking, it's just taking notes, but this is very important because we need to know what each country is saying. So we had a very large group of young people with their laptops sitting there and taking notes of everything what they say in the discussions. This is very important because when we want a very specific text suggestion, for example, the text of environmental defenders, that was very important for us. When we reviewed our tracking notes, we realized that there is only one country that mentioned environmental defenders in their national position, and this was Argentina. If we missed that point of the negotiations, we wouldn't be able to know which country to approach afterwards to ask for support. So we knew it was Argentina, so we harassed the Argentina negotiation after he had some time to meet with us and say, okay, listen, we want this text on environmental defenders. Is this something that you would support or not? And he said, okay, I could support, but change this, and then I will support. And then we had our text on environmental defenders. That is why tracking is so important. The interventions, and as I said, we always try to find different phases of young people that deserves to give an intervention, that has been very active, and that is somebody that can deliver in a convincing way, that has that it doesn't have to be a person who has a lot of experience talking in public, but it has to be someone who looks, who sounds confident on what we say. As I said, delivering an intervention in the UN is a big thing, so we try to be very serious about it and prepare the person correctly. And this is crucial because after the countries here, they decide to support or not. Lobbying is when we approach the country negotiators and try to convince them of our points. We have a lot of different ways of lobbying. We have people lobbying on the corridors, on the coffee breaks, when you have the negotiator with a free time, which is very difficult, you try to convince them of the specific points. If you are on the policy team, you already know from the tracking notes which countries could be convincing about what, and then it's more useful. You find Denmark on the elevator, and so you only have like the time on the elevator to discuss with them, so you cannot explain the whole booklet to them. But you know that Denmark is already supportive of education issues, for example. So you can say, hi, I am from the youth group, and we have a specific position on education that I know Denmark could be supportive of, and you explain. So this is more or less how lobby works, and it also helps a lot to get our priorities through. And finally, community feedback for us is to have like global webinars when everybody can join and explain what happened in the different negotiations. We share what we did in terms of campaign, on communication, on policy and advocacy. So our global community feels represented and they know what we have been doing and that we did our best to represent them properly. And that's it. And oh well, that was exactly 30 minutes. I'm happy about it. Sometimes I take too much time. So I think all the rest of the time is free to questions and answers. And I hope this was a little bit fun. I know it's a kind of dry topic, but I hope it was clear and fun. And thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Mirna. Gosh, that sounded really important. Really important. What you're doing sounds so important, so complicated, and yet, I don't know, you think it's you said it's dull or dry, but I think it's immensely interesting. I think also for the students listening in, because since you're a graduate of UMT, it's not something that is impossible for them to do as well. Exactly. And
Exactly.
we had a question already, actually, just a few minutes after you were speaking. Somebody asked, are there language barrier challenges during negotiations between countries? This question is from Ikmal Hakimi.
Yes, and thank you for the question. And yes, they are. The negotiations, as I explained, happened in plenary and the small negotiations in contact groups. In the plenary, when you enter the plenary, you get a pair of headphones and you can listen to negotiations in the 6 official UN languages. I don't know if I remember all of them, but they are English, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, and I'm missing 2, Arab, and one more that I am missing. But if you don't speak one of these 6 languages, you're lost already because you won't be able to understand the negotiations. And this interpretation in 6 languages is only available in plenary. So when you go to the contact groups, they only speak in English. So it's very tricky for countries that are not from English-speaking countries because they have to send negotiators who are fluent in English. And that is very complicated for many countries like mine when we speak Spanish. And it's very difficult to speak in English unless you did like a master's in English like I did. But otherwise, it's very tricky. So we have many countries with negotiators who are hardly understanding the discussions, and it's more difficult for them to negotiate.
Wow. Yeah, and there's a second question. What is the process of gathering youth priorities from all over the world?
Thank you for the question. And well, as I said and explained, these youth priorities are gathered through national consultations and regional consultations also. So we do a lot of workshops where we try to gather the youth priorities through different dynamics, and in the end, they come in a report. And these reports come through the policy team, but they have to pass a regional filter first. So they have regional coordinators that gather the consultation results from each region, and they compile them into a regional position papers, and they send them to the policy team of given. The policy team, we have 2 coordinators, me and my colleague from the Philippines, Josefa, and we have 30 young people that help us in a volunteer way to compile all of these priorities and summarize them into the global priorities that I showed you.
Wow. The questions are coming fast and furious, Myrna. So someone asked, how do you approach the youth and how do they play a role during the meeting? Hang on. Yeah.
How do we approach the youths?
I guess this Alisa Liana, I think she means how do you get the proposals, I suppose? Get them to respond, as you were talking about just now?
Okay, we approach the youths through these consultations and through the national chapters also. So all the national chapters have calls for volunteers to join the chapter and to work on projects and things like that. To have the youths that they come to the meetings We do a global selection process. So for every meeting, depending on how much funding we have, we set a call for applications to fill 10 slots or 20 slots. Or for this COP, that was a very important COP, we had funding for 150 young people, which was crazy. Um, and also we have like another 150 that came self-funded. So we had like a 300 young people delegation, which is the craziest number we ever managed. But for this, we send these global calls for applications. We give priorities to young people that belongs to the national chapters because they have been working on this for more time. And we had a lot of criteria for selection, like how committed is the person, if they have background on the topic, or at least they are interested, if they have worked on actions at the national level, could be, for example, helping on beach cleanups or giving workshops in schools about biodiversity, or trying to make campaigns about, I don't know, plastic pollution or sea pollution, forest, deforestation, or things like that. So if we see that a young person is committed, has a background, didn't have too many opportunities to attend these global processes, also important because we have a lot of young people that goes from one conference to another, and we don't want these people to just go like doing tourists in conferences if they are not active enough. So after reviewing all of these, their CVs and everything, we select the best of the best to send them to these negotiations.
Okay. Putri Nur Al Aina asks, are there any arguments that you've experienced? Have you had any arguments with negotiators from other countries? Wow.
Yes,
Ooh,
a lot
really?
actually. I think the most dramatic one happened in Montreal some years ago when the youth made an intervention proposing it was something like a youth fund for doing consultations and like a youth program for the CBD. And almost all of the countries supported, but Norway. And Norway made an intervention saying something like they don't support because they think that youth are just blah blah blah, like they are there in the negotiations just saying whatever they want, but they are not doing enough work on the ground to have a separate program in the CBD. And that was a huge argument because our focal point, he kind of cried in the negotiation, and then the Norway negotiators were very bad, and all the other countries like went to him and say like, how could you say that? They are working a lot and stuff. So that was a huge drama until he apologized, and it was very complicated. But well, the thing is that because Norway opposed it, we didn't get this program. But that was really good because that gave us a lot of fuel to do a lot of more actions or reporting the actions on the country. So on the next meeting, we presented the full report of how youth are doing things on the ground, and we got like a bigger program with more funding because of that. So most of the times the arguments end up in a good way.
That's cool. You're getting a lot of questions actually. Behind. Next question. What are the things that you have to consider when evaluating policy text proposals?
Thank you. When we have a lot of proposals that comes from national consultations, and the first things that we have to evaluate is that when something that we say, if this is text that can fly, do you think it is going to fly or not? If it's too ambitious and it demands too much action from the countries, it's very unlikely that it's going to fly. For example, we had a policy proposal that was to give in a specific funding for indigenous peoples, women and youth at the national level so they can do projects without having to go through the filter of the government, which is a really good proposal because many times we don't get any funding, these groups, because it always has to go through the filter of the government, and the government is very complicated to give funding. They ask us for a lot of requirements to have an NGO with a bank account, with legal permits, la 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 la. and we are like youth student groups. So it's very difficult to get these things. So having like direct funding mechanism would be amazing. But we know that it won't fly because governments always want to have the control, especially of the funding. So this is a very important criteria that
Dia
when
orang
we
masih
know
tanya
from
yang
our
tu panggil
policy.
apa? Lupa Sebab yang besi
So
panjang dan duduk
when
itu
we know
strap
that this
bakteria tu
doesn't
orang
have
panggil
many
apa
chances
benda tu?
to fly, we have to soften a bit the text so it does fly. So for example, saying, I don't know, eh, um, I don't know, something like channeled funding mechanisms to indigenous people, women and youth is softer than direct funding. So something like that would fly more. So we try to go for something like that. Other considerations that we have is if it is relevant to the youth priorities globally. If we have a proposal that is not totally related to the global youth priorities, we cannot take it because it's just a personal proposal, but it doesn't align with what people from all over the world have been constantly saying. And the way how it is formulated, it has to come in UN language, it has to be very polite, it has to be very formal. We cannot have a text proposal that sounds too informal or have youth slang that negotiators won't understand because we really need to tailor it to the language that the negotiators use.
I see. Okay, next question. Somebody has a very interesting question here. Azian asks, how can I be part of the global network you belong to? And are there specific skills I need to have a position like yours? Somebody likes your job.
Thank you, thank you. And to be a part of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, it's very easy. If you go to our website, that is gybn.org, there is a specific section that says how you can join. If you want to join as an individual, you just have to sign a form, giving your details, your contact, your email, why you're interested in biodiversity and things like that. Exactly the same website that Mrs. Chasani just shared on the chat. And then you can join as an individual. There is also a form for youth organizations. So if you are a students club or a campaign already, or you have a youth organization already, you can sign up as an organization, and that has a different status. And then you are just part of the network. You will get all the opportunities and the webinars and the consultations by email. So if there is something that's happening in your country and you can join a webinar, you can just join. To have a position like mine, you have to be very active on a specific group for a long time, so they consider you as a potential candidate to be one of the paid staff. We have now 10 people that are paid staff, so we have a job doing this. And we are full-time employed working on gathering youth priorities or doing communications or things like that. I have been active, well, I am a founding member, so I am part of GYBN since 2012. And I got more and more focused on policy on the last 10 years. So they invited me to be a policy, the global focal points invited me to be a policy coordinator because I had a lot of experience, but I also had a lot of focus on policy. I am a bit of a policy nerd. I really like these things. So yeah, the global focal points decide who is really active, who has a passion for these topics, and they invite them to have a position like this and be part of the global staff.
Oh, another question. This is a bit long. Hang on, I have to read it. Okay. Chris says, good morning, Myrna. I have a question about the COP. What does the number indicate? Because apparently COP 15 is the latest, and then COP 27. And also, what suggestions can you give to the youth in Southeast Asia countries? Because Chris feels that the youth voice here is always being neglected, especially in Malaysia. So two questions, one about the number and one about youth voice.
Can I get the second question on the youth voice first?
Yeah, let me read that again. What suggestions can you give to the youth? Because Chris feels that the youth voice here is always being neglected. What
Okay.
suggestions can you give to them? Yeah, for the voices to
Okay.
be heard.
Yes, thank you. Well, first, the CRP means conference room paper, and that is a name for an outcome document of the discussions. And the numbers are related. We have different numbers next to a CRP. It's not only like CRP 12, it's like CRP 12 /2 / la la la. So we have a lot of numbers next to the CRPs. One is related to the number of the item in the agenda. So we have different agendas, one for post-2020, one for SABSTA, one for SBI. So usually all of these have an agenda with items. So the first number is related to the item on the agenda. And then we have numbers that are related to the date when they were discussed. The last number is related to the year. So it all refers to the item and the year when it has been discussed, or the meeting when it has been discussed. So you have some numbers that represent if they were discussed previously or later, but not all of the numbers are only on a time. Not all the numbers are time related, but also related to the agenda numbers. That's for CRPs. But it's a whole another word to understand the numbers on on the documents that we deliver specifically in trainings for the policy team. And about youths for being engaged, it is true that youth voices are traditionally neglected all over the world. But for example, for biodiversity, in mega diverse countries, like Bolivia and Malaysia, that are countries that have a very high amount of biodiversity, it's very difficult to young people to have a space on decision making. And this is also because in our countries, it's not always because the government doesn't like to hear us. Well, sometimes the governments are really bad and they don't like to hear civil society. But most of the times, it is because we have governments that put very little attention to environmental issues because they are still very focused on development. So we have the ministries of development or the Ministry of Infrastructure or Industry having huge buildings with a lot of people working there, and the Ministry of Environment is usually very little. And the biodiversity unit is like 4 people working as much as they can to do as much as they can do, but they have very little power of implementation because they don't have enough capacity. And that is why it's difficult for them to hear young voices, because they are just doing what they can to report on the country actions to the CBD. And that is why what we try to do in Given is our first strategy is not to fight with the government. Like, we don't go to the government building with placards saying, oh, you don't hear us, oh, you are unfair, like fight with them. So, but we try to be strategic and try to go and ask for a meeting between the head of biodiversity unit or somebody that is not too high, that is going to have more time, not the minister, for example, but somebody that works on the biodiversity policies, between this person and a young people delegation, and try to have a 30 minutes meeting when we can explain that we have some priorities, that we did some process of national consultation, we would like to help in the development of the national policies for biodiversity with our priorities. And most of the time the response is positive, because this is people that has a lot of work. So if they have free workers, like young people that want to help us, for example, with internships or doing their thesis with these things or things like that, they are happy to welcome the youth voices. So I think it's a matter of being strategic first. In the end, if it's a really bad government and they close the doors to you and they don't even want to hear you, then you can go with the placards and make actions on the protest. But I think that we never had to reach that point, because most of the time policymakers are actually approachable.
Wow, that's great, Myrna. I think that,
Sorry, Miss.
oh yeah,
I
come on.
have one question to ask. How do you
All right.
convince country negotiators to support your tax proposals?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Hikma.
Well, first, as I said, we do a lot of tracking to know which countries are already inclined to certain topics. So that helps us a lot. So we know in advance, for example, that the European Union is very eager to support education issues, that Argentina is eager to support things on environmental defenders, that all Latin American and Caribbean countries are eager to support things on biodiversity conservation on protected areas, and things like that. So we already know which countries to ask for certain support on certain topics. When we try to convince them, we try to show them how aligned to their national position is our proposal. So say, oh, we heard that you want to something like that, and we think that this is very aligned to what you think. So would you support what we are saying? So that helps a lot. When these are very new proposals that no country is aligned to before, we try to have a lot of arguments that are related to finance, because negotiators are very eager to support anything that will report an economic income to their countries, or something that is going to give them more popularity, because again, politicians care about two things: money and votes. So these are the things that are always good to connect with our proposals. It's not the best, but it is true that the more you protect biodiversity, for example, the more economic stability you are going to have in the long term as a country. So things like that, if we provide with figures and numbers and everything, it's very difficult that they will say no, because it's just logical and they end up supporting.
Great. Yeah, I was just going to ask if anyone else has any questions. Are there any other questions you can ask directly to Señorita Mirna? So I wrote in the chat just now, Señorita Mirna. Because you're from Bolivia, right?
Hello,
Yeah,
I have a question.
go ahead.
I want to ask, especially in negotiation, when we try to propose our policy, there is a certain compromise to take for other country to vote on the policy that we try to bring. My question is, how much compromise are we going to do on that particular policy in order in order for policy to stay true to our goal, except, turn into not something that we actually want in the first place? Yeah, that's my question.
Thank you. And that is a very good question. The level of compromise that we aim to reach is always, it has always have to be realistic. Like, we would love to see very ambitious text, but we know that since the CBT negotiations are taken by consensus, if we have something that is too ambitious, there are more chances that one country will oppose. So, for example, the text on environmental defenders was a very long shot, because we know that many countries don't want to have policies to protect environmental defenders legally, because it means a lot of funding, because it means that they have to have specific instances and groups of lawyers ready to support environmental defenders. So that was very complicated. So, for example, what we would like to have in the text is something like have I don't know, mechanisms to ensure legal protection of environmental defenders and ensure that their lives are safe and their families, imagine something like that. But we know that many countries will not agree with that and will oppose. So our level of compromise is, okay, as long as we have environmental defenders and their rights on the text, we are going to accept whatever a country proposes. Okay, so then Argentina proposed this text that it's lighter than what we wanted, but it still has something on environmental defenders. So we agreed with Argentina's proposal and it went through. And it happily went through, because there were many chances that it was going to be blocked. But I think we just were lucky because it was discussed at the beginning. The negotiators, some of them were not like really aware of what was going on. They were getting ready their coffees or something, and then the decision passed very, very smoothly. And the last bunches of text were more complicated. So yeah, it really depends on how realistic we think, if we think the text is going to apply or not.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you for the answer. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your question. Wow. And anybody else has a question? You better take the opportunity because we will be ending soon. Take your opportunity to ask somebody on the other side of the world.
I'm trying to check the chat if there is something I missed.
Yeah. Same
For
here.
example, what the number indicates. This is a question from Chris. Because apparently COP15 is later than COP27. Yeah, that's something important because COP15 and COP27 are from different processes. COP15 was the CBD COP15, was in December, and that was the biodiversity COP15. COP27 happened in Egypt, in Sharm el Sheikh, in November, and that was the climate change COP27. And when the numbers are so different is because the climate change COPs happen every year. So every year you have a climate change COP. And that's why since it started, you already have 27 COPs, while the biodiversity COPs only happen every 2 years. And that is why you have a less number of COPs. And that's why we had the climate change COP happen. It's just like the climate change 27th meeting happened in November. And then in December, 1 month after, you have the 15th meeting of the biodiversity COP. So the number indicates the number of the meeting. It means that we had already 15 meetings of the COP, the Conference of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity.
That sounds amazing. Do you have one last piece of advice or something to tell the students before we end the talk tonight? Well, this morning for you.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know, my last piece of advice. I think my last piece of advice would be to try to engage in whatever you're passionate about as much as possible and as early as possible. And if it is on a volunteer level, don't worry, like it's going to help anyway to reach, it's going to help you reach where you want to get in the topics where you want to work. I have been a volunteer for the Global Youth Biodiversity Network for more or less 7 years before having been offered a paid position. So it was not something fast. But I didn't care. I was a volunteer, not because I was looking for a job there, but I was a volunteer because I love it to talk about biodiversity issues with young people from all over the world. So when they offered me a position, I was like, what? Are you going to pay me for something that I love and do for free? This is amazing. But and this is something that you usually get when you're super passionate about something and you try to join groups, volunteer, join campaigns. There are youth groups for everything, not only for biodiversity. There are groups youth working on human rights, on technology issues, on gender equality, on, I don't know, on development, on health, on food sovereignty, so whichever issue you're passionate about. Try to find local groups, groups of youth in your country or international groups. Look on the internet. They always have a form to sign, like Given. So you can be a member, you can participate in webinars. And even more now that everything is about webinars, you can join discussions from youth from all over the world. And in the end, they are going to give you insights on where you want to move with your career. And you are going to land in very amazing positions without even imagining, like it happened to me.
Oh, that's great advice. Fantastic advice. Thank you, Mirna. Wow. So before we go, yeah, you're getting a standing ovation right now. Lots of claps.
Thank you.
Before we go, everybody, can you please turn on your cameras, turn on your webcams? We're going to take a picture. I advise you to turn on your camera. I mean, when else are you going to get your picture taken with somebody who's in Bolivia right now?
Oh, so nice to see you all finally.
Your cameras, where Ms. Ja is going to be taking the photographs, I think. Ja, would you like to give the countdown?
Sure. Okay.
There's Ms. Ja.
Yeah, with my cat. Hi, Myrna.
So
Good
cute.
morning.
Oh, so nice. Good night over there.
There's the cat.
Okay, so I think we can start with a countdown.
Mhm.
20? Kak Koja, will you do the honor?
Oh, okay.
20, 19,
Count down or do I count up?
countdown.
Down. Okay, I'll try not to slip up. Okay, let's go. We're counting down. We're taking a photograph, family photo. 20, 19, 18, 17, 16. I hope I don't slip up. 15, 14, 13.
Okay, I'm taking
12.
candid. Candid. Okay, continue.
11. I'm counting in Spanish, Mirna. 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right. Okay, let's smile in 3, 2, 1, freeze. Once. Okay, I'm gonna go to the next page. Let's try this again. 3, 2, 1, peace. Oh, hi, Mario. And I'm done.
Thank you, Miss Ja.
Most welcome.
That was cool. I hope everybody had a great time. And Mirna, you may be surprised to know that we had an audience of over 850 people just now.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
my
you thought
God.
800 was a lot. You had, I think, 853 just now. Is that your
Wow.
biggest audience? Is that your biggest audience so far?
Oh
Thank
my
you
God.
so much. Yeah, that's really cool. So thanks so much again for joining us and telling us about what you do and giving such great advice to the students, because they've been learning about proposal writing and meetings, but perhaps they haven't seen the importance, or they haven't seen what it is in real life, what it means to be doing this in real life. So you have brought this to life for them. So thanks so much, Mirna, and thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. We'll see you again in class. Okay, bye-bye.
Amazing.
Good night, Mirna.
Thank you so much. And thank you
Say
for
hi.
staying until the end.
Bye bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
ありがとう
Bye
ございました。
バイバイ。Thank
あり
you.
がとう。
Cute,
あり
cute.
がとう。
Bye.
ありがとうございました。
Gracias, señorita.
De nada. Muchas gracias a ustedes. To meet you one day. To get to Malaysia. Bye.
Gracias, adiós.
Adiós.
Yeah.
Gracias.
They're taking Spanish, Mirna.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, a lot of them are taking Spanish. So it's like they're hearing all the adios and gracias. Thank you, Mirna. So I'll see you in our personal chat.
Yes, if you have any further question, you can always ask to Mrs. Chaisani, and I will be happy to get back to her.
Yeah, you can just ask me the question. I'll pass it along to Mirna.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Mirna.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Well, good night to everyone over there.
Hasta luego.
Mhm.
Bye.